So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and continuing on from the last one where we were looking at a defence of a very well-established Arnorian city in Tharbad, we now move on to the premier Arthedainian settlement that is in the game, and that is Fornost, ERAIN, which stands apart in terms of how it is made from Tharbad, in the sense that the defenders don't start surrounded, and for the most part the attackers are funnelled in through three separate lanes, and then they have to make their way back to a more unified defence at the rear, which does pose a little bit of an interesting challenge for the defenders, because it's a little bit more difficult to, if you lose one lane, you have to consider how that's going to affect the others as well. I mean, it's unlikely for the centre for that to be the first one, but the two areas on the sides, which do have these areas where you can affix siege towers to and also crumble down sections of walls, could be an interesting challenge. But there's some really good shooting positions, much like there is in Tharbad, and considering it is the Arnorians on the defence once again, both Cardolan and Arthedain have both got some really strong skirmishers that can take very good advantage of these shooting positions as we make our way to the rear of the settlement, albeit there isn't a single position in this map, I would say, where it's a really well dug in position. I think the defenders have to adopt a more blanket policy of really fighting on all fronts right from the beginning to get the most out of this settlement, and really using those firing positions to good effect, and some crossfire as well, just like there was in Tharbad. We'll go through the attackers first and foremost, with one of the attackers here on the flank moving upon the settlement, and Cannon Fodder, who was on the defence last time around, is going to be playing as Rhudaur, this time the traitor kingdom of ARNOR, once again fighting against their brethren. Rhudaur marksmen, so this time bringing a little bit more in terms of their long range skirmishing. Maybe a little bit more likely that they can gain some purchase there, depending on the positions they manage to arrest away from the defenders. You could get into a position where you can shoot down onto the defenders as they're trying to hold lower ground, if you make good progress early through the settlement. So I can see why they've decided to bring these guys, but if they do get held at arm's length, of course, once again, Arthedain and Cardolan should have more than enough to deal with them at long range. It's going to be up close with their damage that Rhudaur are going to be dangerous. The Blackwolds need to be careful that they don't get pinned into a position where the enemy ranged units can take advantage of their very low armour and just defences in general. But if they do get into melee relatively unscathed, their big armour piercing damage and that second hit point will mean that they will do very well, especially against the rank and file of their fellow Arnorians. More Rhudaur marksmen there. Of course, the Witch Realm Enslavers are going to be here. Big arm piercing damage on those two-handed tridents of theirs. Dedicated infantry as well. In terms of finesse and quality, you would say that certainly Arthedain have got some better options, but also Cardolan with their Dunedain. When it comes to sheer savagery, that's where Rhudaur can equalise against maybe the more civilised nature of their brethren. Just in behind as well, throwing projectiles. As always in a siege, whoever can gain the upper hand with this kind of unit really does gain a bit of a boon on the battlefield, and Rhudaur are very good at it, of course. The Atomor's Troll Hunters, pretty well armoured considering the rest of the Rhudaur roster, but it is their damage with those armour-piercing javelins which is going to be the main attraction here, and the defenders will be hoping that they can keep them at arm's length effectively enough. Just in behind, another throwing projectile as well in the Arthedain Berserkers, throwing axes and very effective melee combatants as well. Again, a bit of a no-brainer considering the opposition to bring these guys. I mean, they are pretty expensive and a little bit vulnerable for a unit of their cost and stature. So if they do get, again, isolated, it could be a bit of a problem for them, but as long as Cannon Fodder is paying his due diligence, he should do just fine with them, and they should get decent value as well. More of the Troll Hunters, we've got more of the Blackwolds. We can also see in here the Arthedain Rangers, maybe a little bit of a, an indication that they do have that Arnorian blood in them, because this is the unit which bears quite a lot in common with the Dunedain Rangers, which are inevitably going to be manning the walls as well. Again, big damage. It remains to be seen whether they get into a good firing position, because even more so than the regular Rhudaur marksmen, because of the increased cost, if they get isolated by enemy archers, it's going to be a pretty bad value prospect for them. Once again, some artillery, barbarian catapult. They may wish to crumble the walls early here, which is a very valid tactic, or they may wish to save it, maybe for a final stand to try and poke some holes in the late game defence. And back here, a couple of units of the Coldfell Maidens. They can be used within the interior of the settlement for their javelins, or they can be used as an anti-cavalry skirmisher as well, so always good to have these mounted throwing projectiles, I find, in these siege battles, because of the many ways that you can get value with them. Probably more hidden units here and there for Rhudaur as well. Moving on, we have Bogdan 22k, good to see him again as well. We've got some Angmar halberds for Angmar, obviously, you know, for this kind of unit, I mean, it's a relatively cheap way to get a phalanx unit onto the field, potentially really good value as well, but again, vulnerable to ranged units and also can be easily outranged by all of the pikes that the Arnorians have at their disposal, so might be difficult to get value with them, but they're cheap enough to the point where they're good to just bulk out your army with some numbers anyway. Similar story with the Angmar Marauders in behind, who are actually decent in terms of damage dealing for this kind of unit anyway. Obviously they're not going to pull up any trees with the kind of damage they can dish out against some of the better units the defenders will inevitably have. But still, numerous, and once they get into melee that can really help offset the fact that in behind over here we have the heavy duty Angmar units, the true front line really, of the upgraded Guardians of Cardolan, and one of the units of Witchround Pikemen is upgraded and one of them is not, so you can see where the money ran out for Bogdan here. But yeah, good solid force this, and it's going to be a problem to try and stop them because obviously the armour and the shields is one of the ways in which you can certainly mitigate the damage of especially the Arthedanian skirmishers, considering they're a little bit more archer focused. Angmar of course legendarily difficult to get rid of once they get rolling. Troll Catapult as well, so more artillery, following the trend of the last battle for Tharbad. Some Gundabad Guard here as well, nice heavy spear. And then back here, plenty of high-end units. Not all bodyguard units. I mean, you say the Blackwatch Legion and the Trolls of Angmar are kind of really high-end shock troops in many ways, trying to bust apart those front lines, but also a combination of the Hammer Guard and the Black Guard, so the more aggressive, armour-piercing two-handed Warhammers of the Hammer Guard, and then the slightly more defensively orientated sword and board approach of the Black Guard, but still both very strong in class, and I'm sure that they will be an important part of Angmar moving forward. They may have a couple of hidden units, but not too many. There could be a Barrow White or two. Moving on, another Angmar force. So Angmar here in force today under the command of Tweak, Witchram Scourge Raiders. Again, another mounted throwing projectile unit. Only one. Also, these guys are throwing axes, so not natively armor piercing, but higher base damage. Also, in melee, they are a little bit sturdier, I think, than the Coldfound Maidens, who can be a bit fragile. But still, useful for the utility of those throwing projectiles. You can see the more rusted aesthetic of the Guardians of Cardoon in Tweak's force here, and also more of the Gundabad Guard as well. Angmar Marauders manning the ram as they move forward down the central attacking lane. Another unit of the Gundabad Guard. You can see the armour upgrade here on the Trolls of Angmar as well. I think it's unique for the Trolls of Angmar to have an armour upgrade, but they also don't have a shield, and at their base they're also, you know, noticeably lower in terms of their defensive ability than the Olag High. Certainly the Trolls of the White Hand, with those large shields that they have, more aggressively focused with those arm-mounted blades of theirs, and very damaging as we've seen in the past. Orkfellas, who could run into some problems when it comes to dealing with ranged fire, but a very cheap unit of shock infantry and armour piercing is going to be handy against all of the defenders within Fornost ERAIN. We've got the Witchround Pikemen there, more of the Witchround Blackguard, again the bodyguard unit, the Blackwatch Legion and the upgraded Hammer Guard, so going for that trident of high-end infantry, and then several units of Angmar halberds at the back, so less marauders, maybe more of a focus on having these phalanx units, but yeah, interesting little differences between those armies there. And finally, we have Tommy the Rage Quitter, who's playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. Very numerous, of course. Moria Halberdiers will run into the exact same problems as the Angmar Halberdiers, although Angmar do have access to a pike within their roster, whereas the Orcs of the Misty Mountains do not, so it's not as if they had any alternatives to begin with, so nice to have that cheap phalanx anyway. Another artillery piece in the Goblin War Engine. Interesting, I mean, it is a little bit more chaotic by its very nature, the Mangonel, so we'll see how it does in this sort of environment. It can be dangerous to the Misty Mountains themselves if they're advancing under its fire, but we'll see. I mean, it can be a problem for Cardolan, especially as well, of course, with its morale sapping capabilities. Mountain Orc Berserkers, they may be pretty weak in terms of their defensive abilities, but they are locked morale, which is a bit of a rarity among the Misty Mountains, and it does give them that unit that they can lean on a little bit more to make sure they don't rout when the going gets tough, but their defensive shortcomings means that they can fall away pretty fast as well. Several units of the Moria Spear Guard, as well as the Troll Drummers, to keep all of these regular goblins pointing in the right direction. The higher end unit of halberds as well, the White Orc Fearmongers, which will be a problem if they don't get dealt with by skirmishers and pikes, because they're pretty good as a halberdier goes, and against the armoured defenders, if they do get caught on the end of the halberds, they will be in for a pretty rough time of it. Goblin Kingsguard, not quite as flashy as the Witchround Blackguard, but They will do a similar sort of job for a lower cost, and the taller goblin as the general. Mountain Orc Berserkers here. We've got several units of the Black Uruks of the mountains as well, who are a pretty efficient combatant for what they are. I mean, among heavy swordsmen, they're a bit cheaper and obviously not as high quality as what you're likely to see from a few other factions, but they will get a similar job done, just like we said before, with the Goblin Kingsguard for a lower cost, and there are more of them, so in this sort of situation they could be perfect. And then also the living battering rams that are the Drake Broodlings and the Cave Trolls. They could be used to break through lines. The Drake Broodlings need to be careful, because while they are even more effective than the Cave Trolls, they do suffer at the hands of anti-cavalry damage, like pikes for instance. Cave Trolls do not, very much the opposite. They are very effective against such things, and of course there will be hidden units here and there for the attacks as well, which will reveal themselves, but for the defenders they'll be all mixed together, I'm sure. WK playing as one of the Cardolan armies, and the sharpshooters are ready to loose their bolts immediately. This crossfire at the main gate, not the most attractive prospect for Angmar to march into, but they don't have much of a choice, and Cardolan archers will do the long range job as well. Certainly not as damaging, but they'll be happy to accept any kills that come their way, with decent defensive abilities of their own as well, mirrored on the other side. And up here, just above the main gate, we have the Hearthguard of Amon Sul, who are a more defensively orientated archer, so it's not the most damaging bodyguard archer by far, but they're up here and very, very resilient as well, and they'll be pouring on some damage from up here also. Plenty of units in behind the gate as well, ready. Again, WK with Cardolan leading the way here with some standard Greenway footmen with their armour upgrade. Again, these cheaper pikes are going to be pretty useful in this battle for the reasons that we just said. They can keep most of the enemy at arm's length, and do so for a relatively cheap outlay as well. Cardolan men-at-arms acting as the front line, the shields in front of the phalanx, the classic combination, and again, against the rank-and-file orcs and goblins, they will do quite well, but against some of the scarier armour-piercing units, they will suffer. We've also got the Knights of Fornost under Eclipse's command here, playing as one of the Arthedainian armies, playing on home turf. Interesting if they sally out immediately, because they will meet throwing projectiles and all sorts of other nasty things immediately, so we'll see what the plan is there. Ruffians for some cheap javelins, like we said, throwing projectiles can be really important in a battle like this, even cheaper ones like this for defenders, so we'll see how they get on. We've also got some Tharbad Riders. I mean, they've got the armour upgrade here. I mean, they are very, very effective off the charge, but lower morale, they're not bodyguard units, so they do have that fragility to them as well. No anti-cavalry bonus either. They're really all about delivering a hefty charge with good numbers. We'll see. I mean, it could be a real... the shock value of them is very, very good, so we'll see. The upgraded Tharbad Warhammers will do very nicely against most of even the higher tier units of the attackers. Going toe-to-toe with stuff like the Witchrealm Hammerguard will be an interesting matchup. And just in behind, we've got Sin of the Dark Cloud playing as Cardolan. He sent me both of these replays, actually, despite the fact he was not in the last one for Tharbad, but he's playing as Cardolan here to defend Fornost. Trebuchet of Numenor here as well, so again the artillery back and forth is going to be very much a thing once again. Above the secondary gate, just like above the main gate, we have the other unit of Hearthguard of Amon Sul, this time Sin's example of the unit. Dunedain Rangers on either side as well, so a little bit more damaging perhaps in here. The attackers will have taken a fair amount of losses by the time they get to this point anyway, so that will only heighten once the Rangers have the enemy in their sights. Dunedain Troll Slayers from Eclipse, obviously very devastating with their javelins and also effective up close. A unique animation for a spear unit as well, which makes them an interesting prospect for even trolls to fight. Arthedain Spearmen as well, so a decent defensive bulwark unit here. Again, nothing to write home about the damage that the Arthedain Spears and these Arthedain Men-at-Arms can dish out, but especially when they're fully upgraded like this, they are a solid wall of units, and as long as you support them appropriately, will do you very well indeed. Defenders of Fornost, very much fighting on home turf here. Heavy swordsmen will do, again, very well against the lightly armoured forces that are against them, and considering Rhudaur are on this side, they should do very nicely indeed. The pike's going to be important as well, as they always are for an Arthedain force, alongside more defenders of Fornost and spears. Plenty of regular units for Arthedain to utilise here, which is good. It's one of the main things that Arthedain have in their favour, the fact they've got a really solid force at their centre and then some good damage around it. Arthedain Marksmen here on this secondary gate also. Arthedain Men-at-Arms, we've got the Arthedain Men-at-Arms. It is interesting that Fornost is a settlement that the attackers can find themselves actually fighting downhill on a few times, whether it's moving into the centre past these initial defensive points or on their way to the town centre, and the defenders have to be on the lookout to try and avoid that as best as they can. More spears, we've got more pikes as well, plenty of spearmen and Arthedain men-at-arms. Again, more Eclipse forces, more Arthedain men-at-arms. We've got some Cardolan forces from Sin as well, with Tollkeepers and Footmen and Tharbad Warhammers at the back. Wardens of Tir Gorthan as well, looking resplendent as always. With Cardolan's new look, they really got the best glow-up, I think, of all of the factions in the game. A big step up in their visual quality. Gatekeepers, fantastic at range, and obviously deadly in melee as well with those billhooks. And then over here, T.S. Niehoff, the final of the defenders, playing as the other Arthedainian force. Most of his army must be over here, with the defenders of Fornost. Dunedain cavalry, so throwing projectile cavalry, also for the defenders. Again, more throwing axe units, maybe a little bit more finesse-based than the Scourge Raiders, but these Dunedain units do tend to, if you can't upgrade the armour, be relatively lightweight in that regard, but not huge amounts of archers for the attackers, as you'd expect from Angmar and the Misty Mountains, so might be okay in that regard. Arthedain marksmen and men-at-arms once again, so Arthedain really basing themselves around that solid core that they have. Arthedain marksmen, more Dunedain rangers, ready to dish out that damage, more pikes and men-at-arms. Similar story over here, albeit the trebuchet is here immediately and actually firing immediately as well, so I mean they can shoot over the walls, so we'll see. That may very well end up being where we begin the battle actually. There's a few more units in there as well, rangers and sharpshooters, so the crossfire is going to be pretty brutal right from the off here, but I guess we'll start off over here, because once again, just like on Tharbad, we're going to be starting off immediately. Yeah, let's get this show on the road, shall we? Now, while we have seen in very recent times as well the trebuchet fire over the walls into pretty good effect, I don't know, the Misty Mountains are pretty well spread out, so I don't know if the trebuchet of Numenor here is going to necessarily get the kind of hits that it would ideally want, although it very nearly managed to get a direct hit on the Goblin Kingsguard there. Looks like he's going to try and actually snipe out the enemy artillery of the Goblin War Engine, which is an interesting choice because the Goblin War Engine is something of an erratic thing anyway, so it could actually be used to good effect against the opposition just by letting it live in many ways, just because of the potential for calamity there. Meanwhile, the Knights of Fornost coming outside of the walls here with the Witchram Scourge Raiders immediately taking the opportunity to get into melee range with them. And this was always the risk, I suppose, with trying to get a unit of cavalry outside, is the fact that you don't really have a whole lot of room to work with, so it was worth trying to escape into the open field, but that probably isn't true now. And you may be wondering why Cardolan are coming outside of the walls here, but it does make some amount of sense because it allows you to get very good crossfire off with the sharpshooters, whereas if you don't have an outer defence here, it does mean that the enemy will be able to get in through the gates and in through the walls fairly fast. The archers, of course, are much more comfortable with just linear fire anyway, so this does work. The only potential downside to all of this is whether or not these regular Cardolan troops can withstand enough of a beating to make this sort of play worthwhile, because it's a fairly decent proportion of Cardolan units that are coming outside the walls here, but it is quite an organised front line for something so hastily assembled. We've still got the fire from behind from the arrows as well, but it is going to be the crossbows that will have to be the star of the show here for the defenders. The gates are still very much open as well. It does mean that the siege equipment also cannot be set up on the outer walls immediately. Stuff like the Angmar Marauders, while they've got decent attacking values, these are also the sort of units which the Cardolan infantry don't actually need support to be able to defeat one-to-one. So it's going to be stuff like the Trolls, I think, which are going to be more of a concern. Regular Cardolan men-at-arms are not going to enjoy being in close quarters melee with a unit of Trolls as damaging as Angmars. We'll see. The occasional stray crossbow bolt might give them the leg up they need. Plenty of armour piercing coming forward from the Orc fellas as well. Much more of a rock and roll kind of start to this battle than I was expecting, really. Lots of action right from the beginning with Cardolan's not really sally out, but the choice of defence they've decided to go with Angmar Hellbirds. Surely the choice of target for the archers along with the Orc fellas. Plenty of good value to be had there. I wouldn't recommend sending up any other units of infantry outside the walls though, otherwise you're really banking on this defence being a roaring success, which is no guarantee of that, although Angmar, a lot of their lighter units being committed forward here, which, I mean, that's going to be good news for the Cardolan archers that are up on the walls here. They will be able to get a good amount of value for their troubles. Coming into centre mass there, a few of them will be hitting the Trolls, which won't worry them quite so much with all of their hit points. Meanwhile, just over the hill over here, the mangonel, is being used to knock a hole in the wall, which is, of course, a worthwhile endeavour. Having said that, you do want to keep some of the walls intact, because it will allow you to get some of your range support up on the walls, and the Misty Mountains have got a little bit more in that regard than Angmar.
The walls have fallen.
Heavy Goblin crossbows up on Fornost's walls would be a real problem for the defenders if that were allowed to transpire. Again, standard men-at-arms being utilised. Not really a push over on the mini-map towards the Rhudaur angle just yet, so still very much the central lane being where most of the action is taking place, albeit a fresh Angmar force is going to be rounding the corner, so there is a definite shelf life on this defence. You can see they've been pretty healthy in most areas where the trolls haven't been, but the trolls have punched a hole right through the basic infantry. And as if that wasn't enough, another mass-pushing unit in the Blackwatch Legion now trying to finish this Cardolan defence off in double quick time. But there's a lot of dead Angmarim, and it will be the sharpshooters that are to thank for that. And they can also be used as macemen later on, so they will still have part to play as a melee unit later, trying to crack through the armour of some of Angmar's heavier units up close. Fellas and Gundabad Guard, the remnants, facing off against this wing of the Cardolan defence, and yeah, with this new wave coming forward, some of the unupgraded trolls of Angmar as well, with the Guardians of Cardoon, that's definitely going to be the end of this initial effort from Cardolan. Time will tell whether the kills they got out here with their crossbows will prove to be worthwhile, but you have to remember they lost 3 units of Cardolan men-at-arms in this defence. There's a lot of dead orcs, and there's still going to be a little bit of extra time, but the Cardolan sharpshooters starting to move away from the walls now by the looks of things before they get caught in melee by some of these siege towers that are now being set up. Marauders taking a bit of damage, but they've definitely done their job. I mean, this is what you want as the orcs, to use your lesser units on a defence and an attacking action that's going to be costly for you no matter what you do. There we have it. I think some of the sharpshooters have managed to get stuck, the classic medieval 2 pathfinding on walls and bridges. And over here as well, I mean, certainly aggression from both sides is not lacking. Snow Trolls and Moria Halberdiers moving in at ground level to test the waters of the Arthedainian defence. They have let the walls be, completely surrendering them, but archers at ground level firing away at the Black Uruks of the mountain. Some of the defenders of Fornost arriving now. I mean, the Snow Trolls are not particularly well armoured for trolls, so stuff like heavy swords will do the business, albeit that looks like that was a bit of damage from the trebuchet. I'm surprised they're not using flaming shots actually. Morale sapping capabilities extra useful against the orcs of the Misty Mountains. Pikes getting involved on the front line as well to keep the goblin numbers at bay. Again, it's going to be the trolls that are going to be the main issue here, and especially seeing as they're now in conjunction with Black Uruks, which are a little bit more of a dangerous infantry unit. Far more of a worthy foe for the defenders of Fornost to be facing off against one-on-one. We do have... I mean, the gap in the wall that Rhudaur did create was actually the perfect gap in the wall to actually get the cavalry out into the open field, which they couldn't do through the central lane, but they have now managed to do so courtesy of the attackers. Tharbad Riders, of course, extremely dangerous off the charge as well. I mean, it looks like that has been a big cavalry engagement that we missed, but most of those on lying dead on the ground look to be Coldfell Maidens, so Rhudaur's defensive cavalry effort maybe not working out quite so well, and some good charges as well on Trollshall axe throwers, so less than ideal for Rhudaur that. But also the cavalry is fairly expensive, and I think that will be about where their value begins and ends. Many of the cavalry fleeing now, and you can see continuously taking hits from some of the archers further back, the Rhudaur marksmen, and peeling away at the manpower that the Knights of Fornost have to work with. So I don't know, again, it's one of those situations where I think the crossbows probably did get really good value, but I'm not sure that cavalry necessarily did, even if they did get what they wanted in the end.
The enemy are battering down our gates. The
artillery
through the walls.
trading back and forth.
Let's get no further.
Another hole in the wall. Well, Cardolan men-at-arms being deployed to the walls as well. Some Tharbad tollkeepers. I mean, that will be more than enough to keep the Angmar marauders in check, but it's whether or not the ground-based defence can hold as well. Hearthguard of Amonsul still very comfortably firing away up on the walls. Again, not the most damaging archer and not the most of them, but that damage will all add up. Loosing a few arrows into the open field, killing off a few more of those Angmar halberds.
The enemy's ram has breached the gates.
As the main gate is breached. Oof. More artillery coming in from the troll catapult. Again, not the easiest shots, but if they do manage to make one of those, that's a lot of value that they can get very quickly. They can reposition it fairly fast also. Well, I mean, the trebuchet here doing a huge amount of damage to the Misty Mountains. Things going pretty well for Arthedain over on this side, you have to say. In conjunction with the fire arrows, this is a heady mix, which the Misty Mountains don't tend to do too well against. You can see there was one projectile from the Orc Mangonel that went looping way high up into the air there. And they are actually doing a good amount of damage to the Cardolan forces at the main gate, so weirdly enough the Misty Mountains still able to offer their support to their allies going through the centre, even though their infantry is still getting bogged down against the Arthedainian defenders. Goblin infantry joining the trolls on the front line now, more reinforcements, Arthedain marksmen getting a little bit closer to proceedings, and the Rhudaur cavalry and Grey Company could potentially be really, really damaging as well. Fortuitous hit that, because that could have gone very wrong for Arthedain. That did. Friendly fire. They are routing the goblins, and that will isolate the trolls. That should allow these heavy swordsmen to start knocking them down one by one. So Arthedain will be pretty happy with how this has gone due to Rhudaur Ranger support as well. So, still it's only really on the very outer layer of these defences that the fight is ongoing. Defeat seems certain. The Angmar halberds. Then we have Angmar marauders trying to effect an entry into the settlement, but on their own they won't be able to do that. Being met immediately by some Cardolan resistance. Pikes in the background as well, some ruffians offering some support with javelins, but scattered effort there at best. Snaga archers. Angmar don't have the best of archers, but what they do have could be useful in this situation if they can get into a good firing position against the pikes. Gundabad Guard and some of the remaining orc fellas going up against these Tharbad Tollkeepers, who again tried to step forwards a little bit, but that was maybe not too beneficial to them, because they're going to get finished off relatively quickly by the looks of things.
The enemy siege tower has reached our walls.
Siege tower in place. Tharbad Warhammers are actually up on the wall over here, so I mean they did send Guardians of Cardolan to try and go down this route, so it was a little bit more serious to begin with, but Cardolan well and truly shutting the door in Angmar's face there, but plenty of orc fellas arriving on the walls, also some Angmar halberds, so the pressure will continue, but the Tharbad Warhammers should be fairly comfortable for the time being. Still these Cardolan archers continuing to fire away as well. It looks like they're about to be pressured in melee by Guardians of Cardolan, however, which is not a particularly great melee fight for them. Risky shots from the artillery all round. None of them have been too devastating yet for either side. Rhudaur now joining in, getting their infantry into the settlement. Where was that from? I think that was friendly fire, honestly. Yeah, the Trebuchet of Numenor firing across, and that definitely not worth it. Again, the risks involved with artillery. I think they were probably going for this blob of Rhudaur axemen over here, but if your own units are nearby, that's always the risk you take, and it did not pay off for the defenders there at all. Rhudaur axemen's lack of defensive ability is probably going to cost them in the long run in this engagement anyway, but it's how much damage they do as they go down swinging, which will be the thing of most interest. Arthedain man-at-arms earning their pay. Some defenders of Fornost just in behind, so they'll probably need some slightly more rigid units to join them on the front line here, the Rhudaur axemen. Otherwise it's probably not going to end too well for them, but getting Rhudaur Rangers up on the wall is a good move. It'll allow them to shoot down with some big damage. I mean, considering they started off, they managed to push some holes in the walls and such, they haven't really upped the ante in the middle here, the attackers. Not in any great rush by the looks of things. Ooh. That will change the complexion of things a little bit, however. The Witch is always a potential problem. And, I mean, the morale-breaking capabilities against a force like Cardolan could also be a massive problem for them going forward. They did actually rout their own units by doing that, however, so it wasn't a complete win, that, for Angmar by any means. But certainly more positive than negative, you would suggest. Cardolan Men-at-Arms continue to push back against the basic Angmar units over here, reclaiming more and more of the walls, so losing ground, in fact, Angmar in some areas, and still sallying out, so not much of the interior of Fornost has seen orc footfalls yet. My footmen moving forwards, I mean, being this aggressive with pikes is maybe a little bit questionable, but depends if they can get themselves situated. If not, then Angmar will probably crush whatever formation they were trying to form, but for now, so Cardolan archers here, not doing too well against the Guardians of Cardoon, as you would expect. Dedicated, really quite good unit of line infantry against a unit of archers, for whom melee is a secondary concern. But I mean, they could reposition the Tharbad Warhammers once they're done over here, because they've nearly completely won this fight over here. So options, certainly. The Misty Mountains, meanwhile, their attack has been completely broken. As soon as the trolls fell, that was always likely to be where things got a little bit dicey, especially given how quickly they seemed to be routing. There we have it. The Drake Broodlings now moving forward with another wave of Moria Halberdiers, so with more units being siphoned away from this front line, there is now the possibility of causing havoc with what they have left, and the Drake Broodlings should be able to push through these units fairly quick. There's no anti-cavalry here, so they should be fairly comfortable. Moria Halberdiers in decent numbers as well. Joining them, Blackback Berserkers and Goblin Kingsguard. So I mean, this is a pretty significant moment for the Misty Mountains here, because if this doesn't work, then they could be in trouble. But they have enough strength here, and they're going to be causing enough havoc that I think it should. And Arthedain were already in the process of moving some of their units to maybe support Cardolan, which maybe been a little bit premature there. Meanwhile, some upgraded Guardians of Cardoon joining their unupgraded brethren on this section of wall. Should be more than enough to help secure this position long term. And a little bit further over here, Tharbad Warhammers still. I mean, they're not going to be able to move now, especially not now that they're facing off against the Hammer Guard, and the Tharbad Warhammers having already, I mean, admittedly they haven't taken that much damage at all, but they have been in battle for a long time, and these units are fresh. Also, the Witcher-Armed Blackguard are here, so 2-on-1, fresh units as well.
Our men are in command of the city.
Angmar Marauders over there. Cardolan Sharpshooters still firing away as well. There's not a huge amount left in the tank for Angmar. I mean, I imagine this will probably end up working, given the fact that they are now really pushing on multiple fronts. Misty Mountains restarting their attack on the other side as well is a sign that maybe the defenders need to start thinking about contingency plans. They did have units back there anyway, but it might be time to start thinking about retreating some more. A few cavalry units. Good opportunity maybe to get some charges off into the exposed bits of the attacking armies. Hearthguard of Amon-Sul down off the walls. Very defensively adept, but will they be able to hold out for any length of time, especially if they end up getting surrounded. As for Rhudaur, again, a hefty amount of losses by the looks of them. Lots of dead Rhudaur troops here. Rangers taking hits. Arthedain Spearmen over there taking damage as well, but the marksman, probably a trade that Arthedain would be willing to take, but Arthedain already in the process of pulling back a little bit. They do have their own walls over on this side as well, which they can use for their ranged units, which they already are doing. Artillery still being used. I mean, this is the moment where artillery can really pay dividends for you, because if you can get some good hits on the attackers as it looks like they're in the ascendancy and there's less risk to you, that's how you can really get a leg up on the opposition. Fellas. Fire arrows still raining in. trying to play the morale game here. How successful that's going to be, I'm not sure, considering the fact that the wind is now well and truly in Angmar's sails, and they're very difficult to stop when they're in this situation. It's exactly the sort of thing that they're good at as they start to swarm into the entry courtyard of Fornost. Definitely time to start thinking about retreating now, but the secondary defence is already set up, and this is the opportunity where cavalry can make that transitional phase less painful for defenders. It's a little unfortunate for one of the defenders, not sure who. Still taking hits as they go forwards. I mean, the Hearthguard of Amon-Sul are going to get left behind, but like I said, I mean, Angmar did take a lot of losses in that initial attack, so they may not have enough left in the tank to be solely responsible for taking the town centre. Bad riders on the way forwards as well, just trying to get what charges they can. The Lancers did come down there, so that was a charge that very much connected with those Guardians of Cardolan. And then the Misty Mountains. That was a Cardolan general, I believe, yes. And then the Misty Mountains also now in the ascendancy, despite that earlier setback for them. That secondary attack when Arthedain were a little bit more thin on the ground has worked out very nicely. Halberds stacking up on the inner walls here, but it doesn't look like they're going to be defending those. It looks like they're going to be consolidating around the centre of Fornost and around the moats, which is probably wise. Some of these units not able to get away in time, including a unit of Dunedain Rangers. They need to dump as much of their ammunition as possible while they still can. I mean, there are infantry units on the way. There's only a unit of Arthedain marksmen to cover them. So again, leaving ammunition out there. These Arthedain marksmen still had a few arrows as well, so not ideal from an Arthedainian perspective there. Still firing away down there. Quantity of kills, maybe, the name of the game at this point. Trebuchet also left behind. That was a bit of a mixed bag, but it got some good hits regardless. Dunedain Rangers over here also. So the way to get over here, there's a lot of ways actually. Bit of a maze. So far the Misty Mountains won't actually be able to get into a position to intercept these Dunedain Rangers. They will eventually, but it's just a case of how many kills those Rangers can actually get. It may actually be enough. That support will be enough to save the Arthedain marksman. Looks like they just ran out of ammunition though, so now axes in hand. Can they retreat to the town centre? They do have an open path still, so they should be trying to make use of that if it's all possible. Bad Warhammers, only 9 of them remain, but fighting hard. Not actually even fighting off those Guardians of Cardolan, just trying to get as many shots onto more vulnerable units as they possibly can. Angmar now moving forward. I mean, going to have to reorganise their siege equipment. Some ruffians here, standing tall in the face of trolls. Getting a few javelin volleys off while they still can. One last one. No real kills, but that damage may very well be important later on. Rhudaur still haven't pushed any further forwards just yet, and Arthedain I think will be thinking about retreating in behind the gates over here. They may be a little bit more willing to hold this fortification over here. The only issue is there is another way up. You can go, looks like you can shimmy along the walls. But we'll see. Rhudaur are a little bit more vulnerable perhaps defensively in this sort of battle, certainly than Angmar, but even the Misty Mountains, just due to more expendable units I guess, are more comfortable in this sort of situation. Cardolan sharpshooters finally break. Tharbad Warhammers now out of the way, so it's going to be overwhelming force applied to the defenders over here. Dunedain Rangers now pulling out their axes in melee for a last stand. And however many kills they get will certainly be useful. Just trying to cut down on those attacker numbers as best as they're able. Cardolan also firing away now, looping their shots pretty high in the sky. Good amount of defenders still left, however, that they can consolidate around. And is actually moving back out to potentially refortify this location. I guess the Misty Mountains were pretty depleted, given their struggles earlier on. The ladders have now been reclaimed, having to go back outside the walls to refetch their siege equipment, which I guess is why they've had the opportunity to refortify this area, maybe think twice about what they were originally going to do. Are they still content to hold up here as well? And I guess the thinking there is they've got some really good crossfire opportunities that they can set up, which Rhudaur should be especially vulnerable to. Allied Rangers over here also. Axemen pulling the ladders forwards as well. The Barbarian catapult firing away. Trying to loop some shots over the wall. Decent enough angle. Is it going to hit though? I think the buildings are going to get in the way. Fair amount of cover. I mean, if you can thread the needle, it's a good opportunity to get some pretty good value. Once again, the half guard of Amon-Sul taking up a central position, the other unit having already been defeated, of course. What's going on here? Some routing Arthedain marksmen and Rhudaur rangers. They're going to get minced by the trolls. So there will be no return to the town centre for them. Ladders in place. Or about to be in place anyway. Halberdiers depleted. Wardens of the North are here as well, so I mean that's a hefty amount of damage that could be deployed by Arthedain if they so chose. I think this lull in proceedings is the attackers thinking about their next steps. Yeah, unsurprisingly. A grisly fate for these retreating Arthedain marksmen. Those gates will remain firmly closed while the trolls are looming large, albeit they have been depleted somewhat and they are bloodied, so they may not be the long-standing threat that Angmar might want them to be in the final stages of this. Angmar Marauders joining in as well. Half-guard of Amon-Sul watching on stoically as their brethren get butchered. Ruffians moving forward. Least amount of damage done there to those Arthedain men-at-arms in perfect formation. Occasional arrow being looped forwards. Rhudaur marksman. I mean, I guess any kill is a good kill, but the pace at which you're going to get them front on against armour upgraded and shielded infantry like this with basic archers like that is going to be low, to say the least. Men-at-arms moving back out into the streets.
The enemy are battering down the gates.
And that building is really proving to be a good defensive fixture for the defenders in the town centre. Arthedain Rangers continuing to fire away from the walls.
Our enemy's ladders have reached our walls. It's time for butcher's work.
Snagger archers. And the ram is finally being pushed forwards.
The enemy's ram has breached the gate.
About to say, Misty Mountains probably would be a little bit closer given the position of their ladders, and that is true. They are now ready to begin their attack. The Rhudaur Rangers are going to be waiting for the Goblin Kingsguard, but it is a bodyguard unit which is going to be first up on the walls here. So those axes are going to have to do a good amount of heavy lifting here in order for this to be a success. Goblins, the best of the goblins, also Mountain Orc Berserkers following them in behind as well. So the attackers have been pretty good at this. Like when they have decided to move forward in force, they have done so and really committed to it. They've followed through with strong units behind strong units to really hammer home the point, and it's just whether or not the defenders are going to be able to respond to that sort of thing. They've got a good setup here defensively, but it's whether or not they have the quality, and they're going to need to rely on stuff like pikes to be able to be efficient against something like the Whiter at Fearmongers, even with the engagement being in a shape that they will prefer. We'll have to wait and see. Mountain Orc Berserkers also at ground level.
Blast their eyes! The enemy's ram
Central
is the
lane
gate.
also
Only half the
reopened
enemy
now.
force remains.
Some of the goblins able to get in and around that defence, but the Horns of the North now cutting that lane off. Bad news for the goblins that are around here. They will be thoroughly outmatched by them. Well, they will have to deal with this small amount of Moria Spear Guard that have broken through so that these archers can continue to be as effective as possible. You can see the initial break into the final layer by the first of the orcs to push in through here, but the Cardolan defenders ready and waiting for them. Easy enough to kill off some of these dregs. And then the trolls as well. Artillery firing overhead. Ooh. One of the trebuchets fallen. That is a problem. They kind of really prefer that artillery to stay alive. I think this is going to convince Sin to begin firing at
Half the enemy force remains.
the attackers as they start pouring in as well. That is a very good hit as well. Cutting down on that manpower ever further. The castle itself acting as the trebuchet shield there. The pikemen trying to get around the corner so they're not in the immediate firing line of what damage the trebuchet wants to inflict. They continue to push forwards. Sharpshooters are actually firing, but they don't really have the angle of fire to be super impressive. Trebuchet not firing any longer, and Rhudaur. Well, actually, Arthedain units have pushed forwards to try and take the fight to Rhudaur in the end, so a little bit of a lopsided engagement again, maybe lagging behind their allies a little bit. I don't think these Arthedainians are actually going to be victorious over here, but it will keep Rhudaur away from the main fight, which will be good for the defenders ultimately, that sort of asymmetrical feeling to it. They'd much prefer a bit of Rhudaur support be close by. The goblins, meanwhile, are putting pressure directly on the town centre. If they were to continue to move forward, that would be a problem. Goblin infantry, we know, of course, not the finest quality, but in numbers, causing problems for the Arthedain defence. They are losing ground, mostly as a result of the armour-piercing units that the Misty Mountains have in here. Those Whiter and Fearmongers, those Mountain Orc Berserkers, both going to be effective in this sort of situation. So not the most surprising thing here that Arthedain's defence is ultimately going to falter. Again, it's just how efficient they were able to be here, but it's getting close to the time now where efficiency isn't going to cut it. You are just going to have to be straight up victorious because you don't really have anywhere else to move back to now. You have enough units left in reserve to be able to pull off the victory here. Trolls moving in as well. Healthier unit. They've already done the business against Cardolan once, and now they're going to try and do it again. Yeah, not ideal firing lines here for some of these supporting units for Cardolan. Maybe waited a little bit too long to use them. Guardians of Cardoon moving in as well. The Troll Catapult will be a real concern. Looks like both trebuchets have now crumbled. So good hits, but maybe not quite enough. As the Angmar brute force once again being brought to bear, needed a little bit more on the front line there if they could. This sort of layered approach, not necessarily the best thing to do when you're facing off against a force which is capable of smashing through those layers one by one as efficiently as Angmar are. And without artillery, they can't even take advantage of the situation as it now stands. Tharbad Warhammers loitering with intent as well. Arthedain, 2 units of. Gatekeepers waiting. Do they still have ammo? I'll be time to try and use it if they do, even if it isn't the most efficient use. And the one good thing that may come out of this is that Angmar are getting a bit far ahead of their allies. If Angmar do get destroyed quickly, the Misty Mountains look as though they're going to be able to reinforce them in short order. So the attackers again are looking pretty good in this situation. Definitely will be the happier of the two sides going into the final phases. They continue to move forwards. They've got a few options now as well. They can spread out throughout the streets, Angmar. Tharbad Tollkeeper's victory almost a certainty. Hammerguard. Big amount of armour piercing. Should be good against those rank and file Cardolan units, but contained at the moment, Angmar. Looked like things would get out of hand for a moment there. Grey Company going to try and get into a position where they can get some side-swiping hits, which looks as though they will. Angmar do see it immediately though, so the Good and Bad Guard will peel off. To get one shot, extremely damaging of course the Grey Company. Actually getting some friendly fire there, the Trolls, but far more damage done to the defenders, so again on a cost analysis perspective you would probably say that's worthwhile. Further on, Drown Pikemen. Defenders of Fornost. Numbers still to put up some good resistance to Nine Trolls there, so some good quality as well. Looks like they are now finally retreating, so it will be a bit of a rearguard action against Rhudaur, who are actually struggling against Arthedain here. This counter-offensive, they haven't really had things go their way in this fight, Rhudaur. They may be victorious here against Arthedain as a result of the Black Wolds, but stuff like the Enslavers and Berserkers, but it will be with a limited amount left, so Rhudaur's reinforcements may not be heavily forthcoming, but Arthedain can now siphon off a few more resources to try and help defend the town centre, and indeed it's not really a choice. Even if Rhudaur were doing very well, you need to defend the town centre, because otherwise it's game, set and match to the attackers anyway, so Eclipse with no choice to try and go about things in that way. The Troll Catapult now getting involved in the melee. Still holding on this front line here, but the upgraded and unupgraded Witchrealm Hammerguard. Tharbad Warhammer's still healthy. There's the worrying sight of the Goblin War Engine. We have firing, but also in a pretty difficult location for it to fire effectively anyway. It's chaotic at the best of times, even when the situation is suitable for them. The sharpshooters fire at the goblins as they try to make their way through this narrow position. Decent firing lane for them. Is that going to be enough? Units, the Grey Company, very close. Doing good damage here, the Grey Company.
Good tidings. The enemy general.
Rhudaur General falls. So their woes continue. Again, Angmar don't have the most units left. Numbers of units may very well prove to be the problem here. It's a rare situation where the numbers abandon the attackers rather than the defenders, but that might be the situation we're looking at here, which would definitely vindicate the defenders' decision early to defend in front of the main gate because of the damage they did there. Oof. The crunching sound of artillery once again, going after the gatekeepers, who are already wavering as a result of a direct hit from the mangonel. Even one of the stronger units that the game has to offer. Misty Mountains now moving forward. Sharpshooters now pulling out their maces in melee. I did mention earlier on that this is one of the benefits of having such a unit. Now's the time for them to prove it. Troll Slayers also in close attendance, so some good units here, but the gatekeepers will not be able to offer their support with their crossbows any longer because they're getting attacked by the Gundabad Guard and continuing to get hammered on by the Goblin War Engine. Shaken up. The black streaks of projectiles on the horns of the north also arcing through the air. And again, the Misty Mountains are another one of those factions because of some slight difficulties earlier on. They don't necessarily have the numbers in reserve that they would under normal circumstances, so they can't rely purely on that, although this is maybe the great equaliser of a unit here, the Witchers. If I look over, they barbecued some of the Tharbad Warhammers, and I guess that was their amount of ammunition. They don't have the most ammunition, so we did see them get used earlier on, so that does make a certain degree of sense of just being committed to melee now. They're not that good in melee, honestly, but may as well throw them in, see what they can do. Witcher and Blackguard as well, so this fight over here starting to go the way of the attackers again. It's just a case of can they get defenders, do they have units in reserve that can be used to good effect. Trebuchet Numenor crew. Goblin War Engine has been surprisingly reliable, actually. It's been used in much the same way a catapult would in this sort of situation. It's performed well. This front line says Arthedain on the receiving end of a loss there, but Witcher and Pikeman Guardians of Khan do more numbers perhaps slightly, but it's a very even fight. It's not one that would be resolved quickly. There will be others that will perhaps inform on that a little bit more swiftly. Arthedain Marksman. Cavalry also nudging their way forwards, but they won't want to be in sustained melee against the Blackguard, albeit both the Tharbad Warhammers and the Trebuchet Numenor crew together will be able to defeat the Blackguard fairly comfortably, especially with that armor-piercing damage that they can dish out. 9 Troll Slayers. Goblin infantry pushing forwards towards the town centre, taking the direct route, although they're not going to be able to overcome Wards of Tir Gorthad and Hearthguard of Amon-Sul with the scraps of what remains of their infantry. Goblin War Engine crew as well. So no more artillery either. They may be here in decent numbers, but the quality just isn't there. So it's all well and good to put a bit of pressure on. Blackguard. Separated from the Hammer Guard, unlike earlier on, but slowly starting to turn the tide over here as well, which is not too surprising given the fact that the Hammer Guard are here. Again, it's all a matter of numbers. It's going to be fine margins, this. Arthedain Marksman joining on the front line with the Warhammer-wielding units. Or at least one of them. Where did the Trebuchet of Numenor crew go? Died off instantly. Starting to rout now some of these units. Again, another bad sign for the defenders. And what's happening with Rhudaur out here? Looks like they are finally going to just about see themselves over the line against this sort of satellite Arthedain force. But it does of course mean that even though they're going to be relatively small in number, Rhudaur will arrive with some extra units to try and take the town centre. So ultimately, no real respite for the defenders. Snugger. pressure on. It does mean that there is a distraction. These units now can be used to reinforce some of the areas which are maybe struggling a little bit more. It's just how quickly these goblins can be defeated and the unit focus is shifted. Plenty of rangers, plenty of decent quality units for the defenders still with cavalry. Don't know how useful that's necessarily going to be. What on earth happened to those? That Trebuchet of Numenor crew, it can't have melted away that fast, surely. There's a few of them dead on the floor, I guess, but that would be a very disappointing performance from them if that was the case. Fearmongers alongside the Blackguard now as well. Chaos ensuing around the second of the two Fornost statues. Or courtyard statues anyway. Definitely not lacking for those in this settlement. Grey Company trying to reposition themselves. A few more projectiles. Still that front line over here, but again that was looking like a steady Angmar victory, although maybe not. Pretty even, but defenders need more of a substantial win, I think, at this point. Need to see a decent number of units start to flee. Dunedain Rangers getting involved in melee on one side of these Guardians, although the Tharbad Warhammers are the unit on the other, so that may very well be enough. These trolls engaging in fisticuffs. Victory. Still around 52 Hammerguard remain, which is a difficult thing to try and overcome. The Blackguard, the Tharbad Warhammers and the Blackguard actually separated from one another, so both still active, but the Dunedain Troll Slayers, it says defeat is a distinct possibility. Again, 61 of them really ought to be able to overcome 33 Blackguard. They're fresher as well, the Blackguard are all bloodied up, so that again, poor performance from them if they're not able to see themselves over the line there, because it's what the defenders need. They're going to need their elite units to stop dragging their heels. Forces reasonably even, but the Tharbad Warhammer's probably on the wrong end of the shape of this engagement, a little bit more scattered as they are. The ones of the north joining the Rangers to try and equalise the odds against the Witchhound Hammerguard. A few units in the background there, Whiter and Fearmongers still forming up a defensive perimeter around the town centre. The Goblins not making any further progress, but still keeping some of those units on lockdown. Whiter at Fearmonger should be finished off as well, so a few wins starting to emerge for the defenders. Need a few more of them. Hammerguard. Blackguard, I mean this is much more like it from the Troll Slayers. As soon as their weapons started connecting, the Blackguard started to fall, weary as they were. So that's good. Hammerguard, 14 of them. 3 of the Witchers still remain, but being used as a melee force now. Hearthguard of Amon-Sul being added to the equation as well, a difficult unit to wear down. It's just whether or not they have the offensive capabilities to help see their team over the line now. Flooding forwards. Victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. Able to finish off those Whiter at Fearmongers. Finally it looks like over here Angmar will just about get the better of Arthedain, but they've managed to hold on for long enough where things are less certain across the rest of the battlefield now for the attackers, and they may be running out of steam here. The defenders may very well be able to outlast them. attempting to take the town centre on their own. I mean, it is only Arthedain marksmen in their way, but there aren't that many of them left anymore. They prove to be too much. Defeat seeming certain. Why is everyone trying to contact me on WhatsApp right now?
Our men have slain the enemy general. Without him, his troops will lose their will to fight.
People never want to talk to you when you're free, do they? It's only when you're doing something. Unit 9 Troll Slayers scurrying forwards. Players starting to admit defeat. There's the Angmar General, the Witch Realm Blackguard. Actually survived that volley from the Troll Slayers as well, but it's looking more and more like this is going to be a defender victory. May not have been able to defend Tharbad, but it looks as though they will see themselves over the line here at Fornost. The last stand for the General, advancing right into the middle of the Troll Slayers as well. Intriguing idea.
Good tidings.
There he goes, with immediate effect. Wielding their spears more like axes, the Troll Slayers. I mean, amazingly enough, these regular goblins have actually lasted longer than some of those elite units that were making progress earlier on, so fair play to the Goblin War Engine crew. They've actually put up more of a fight than I was expecting they might have. Of course, now the question is, what sort of units are Rhudaur bringing to the table here later on? Hearthguard of Amon Sul seem to be taking them on. Not many is the answer, but it is Black Bolt and it is Witch Realm Enslavers. There's just not that many of them. The Hearthguard of Amon Sul outnumber them, and that should suffice, albeit it is risky. Something like the Witch Realm Enslavers should be really, really good 1-to-1 against the Hearthguard of Amon Sul, but I think it'll be enough for Rhudaur. Chaotic fight this, and usually those do go the way of the attackers. Certainly when it's an orc-led attack, but on this occasion, as though the defenders will weather the storm.
Behold how our cowardly foe runs. It's time to press the attack.
Press the attack. That is that for them. So I think actually it is the last... I mean, there's not much left, of course. The occasional scattered unit, mostly from Arthedain, actually. Wards of Tirn Gorthad and Hearthguard, the only ones that remain. For Cardolan. This is going to be the last fight. So, I mean, ironically enough, Rhudaur will be the last of the attackers left. It feels like we've not seen too much of them. It's because they haven't really been making much progress. Late on, they're the attackers' only chance, and it's a chance which is something that comes with pretty long odds indeed. Defeat seems certain.
Behold how our cowardly foe runs. It's time to press the attack.
Unit Troll Slayers on the way. I mean, that sort of damage should finally finish this battle off. 4% the difference as well. Decent little victory this for the defenders. Something which I'm sure will please most people watching. Remains of the units start to make their way forward. Defenders of Fornost, it's a healthy unit actually at 61. Defeat. Staring down the barrel of it now, the attackers. So there we have it, another one of these set piece maps shown. The two more civilised Arnorian factions. We have actually seen all of them actually since release of the new patch, because Morvatarth, the Rhudaur one, was the very first one that we showed on release, so that's all of the Arnorian capitals. And Rhudaur may have to defend that one again in the continuity of this situation. Tharbad could be reclaimed with most of the manpower being thrown forward.
It could have been we that were slain and defeated on the field, but fate has been kind and delivered us victory.
Yeah, a close run thing. And fair play to the defenders, because that early decision to defend the outer walls in front of the main gates and get that crossfire set up was vindicated in the end, even though they did end up getting pushed back as soon as the trolls arrived. It ended up being a good move, because you can see WK with all those kills, those crossbows would have been significant. Eclipse also doing very well against Rhudaur played its part, because if Rhudaur were also attacking the town centre late on there, I don't think they would have been able to cover all of those angles, and the attackers probably would have ended up winning as well, so that's something else to consider. But also, I mean, the attackers had their good moments, they pushed through. The Drake Broodlings attack with the Misty Mountains, the Trolls and the Great Shields of Angmar right on the front line, and also Rhudaur, when the cavalry did come outside the walls, they took damage initially, but then between them and their allies, the cavalry was contained and dealt with. Whether or not they did get value before they were, it's hard to say really. But in the end, the overall result of all of these factors building up is a pretty narrow defender victory. So let's see what did the damage for Cardolan. WK's units, I mean, Hearthguard of Amon-Sul, despite the fact they were left behind, 283 is a good return. Cavalry did okay. The Tharbad Warhammers fighting up on those walls got a huge amount of kills as well. Cardolan Men-at-Arms, varying fates, but basic units like that often do have that afflicting them. Yeah, 385 and 249, which were pretty quickly racked up for those units. And then the archers also joining in with that as well. The ruffians may be less good as a range support unit, but they're also the cheapest. So swings and roundabouts, the crossbows certainly did their part, and that was one of the main factors in the win. As far as Sin's army goes, I mean, 345 on the Warns of Tyr and Gorthau, but a lot of that was on regular Goblin infantry and Goblin war engine troops. So again, that is worth bearing in mind. Sharpshooters, varying fates for them, but then they didn't have the perfect firing angles. Trebuchet of Numenor did pretty well also. It's pretty much what you'd expect. Definitely leaning more so on their range support, but Cardolan and Arthedain, especially when they're together, you know, the mix of crossbows and rangers and archers and all of those range support units can be a very potent mix, and we have seen that in both victory and defeat in the last two battle replays. And big thank you to Sin for sending both of them in, even though this was the only one he was a part of. It was good to see both of them nonetheless. But yeah, always good to see these set piece maps as well, because obviously people have worked quite hard on them, so it's always nice to get them some extra publicity. As far as what's going to be coming up next, we do have there's an Evil Men Cityscape map, which we have seen before, but that one I think will be the next one up, because I think it's the only one in the backlog I have left that isn't a repeat of a map that's been shown already since the release of the new patch, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I'm really trying to not repeat maps as much as I can, because otherwise things get stale very, very quickly, so that is worth bearing in mind. And of course the faction overview series will continue, and considering we're now into the month of December, or nearly into the month of December, the sort of end of year channel update will also be towards the tail end of the month. A few things to discuss in there, definitely relevant information, but yeah, that'll be something to look out for as well. That's the basic near-term plan, and that's the only thing to really concern ourselves with at the moment. Yeah, big thank you to all the players that were involved. Big thank you to Sin. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.